Hello, everyone, and welcome back to UC Central Live. This morning, what we saw in Jack's plenary was a lot of focus on imagery and the power of imagery in GIS. And I'm really happy to say Rae is over at our other set with some very special guests to talk more about imagery. Rae.
Thank you, Nick. So as you guys know, I'm a user, and to be completely candid, I only use imagery in a really narrow sense. So I'm here with 3 members of the team chartered with bringing the power of imagery and remote sensing to ArcGIS. So on my far left is Vinay Viswambaran, Principal Product Manager. I also have Peter Becker, Group Product Manager, and Richard Cook, Director of Business Development for Imagery and Remote Sensing. Richard is remote with us. So, to ask my first question to the group, when we talk about imagery, we're talking about it usually quite generally. Can you guys chime in on that?
Yeah, sure. We do use the term imagery fairly broadly at Esri because it really encompasses a fairly broad range of data types and collection platforms. So optical data, like you saw in the U.S. Forest Service presentation this morning from Landsat or Sentinel, or some of the commercial providers like Maxar or Airbus. But it can be spectral data or radar data, even video data. And then it can also be rasterized data like temperature and elevation or point clouds. And it's really taking us beyond just, historically what we've looked at as 2D imagery now to 3D and even 4D as we're able to add the time dimension, which Vinay will talk about. But it moves us from a static representation from a single point in time to really many representations across time. And that is really where time is starting to be defined more, even daily or even multiple times daily, depending on where that data is coming from, what platform it's coming from.
Richard, thank you so much. I love that. That was really descriptive and it helped me a lot. So thinking a lot about all of these things, I'm realizing the reason I probably haven't used a lot of imagery and AI is because I work on animal movement, as you guys know. And animal movement is often super dynamic, whereas imagery is quite static, right? It's a picture, essentially. But when I was a student, remote sensing was a separate subject with different software. I remember that Esri had Spatial Analyst as a tool, which could do some suitability modeling and other raster analytics. But can you guys tell me, we'll start with you, Peter, what has changed?
Well, a lot has changed in the last 10 years. I mean, we realized that imagery was going to be the real next big data, and the volumes of imagery were increasing massively. So we focused initially on the server component, the image server, and the management and providing accessibility to the data. We then added ArcGIS Pro, when ArcGIS Pro came out, we added the image capability to process imagery and do analysis on the imagery. And then what became clear is that the volumes of data were still growing even more, and it was going to be impossible to actually visualize that data. So we really looked into adding deep learning capabilities and raster analytics to sort of scale that up, and then also transitioning things into the cloud, moving this capability into the cloud. So now we really have highly scalable deployments, both in ArcGIS Desktop, in enterprise, and in online. So that's really enabling us to scale this up. And we also added dedicated, which is the ability to spin up this compute right next to storage, massive storage in the cloud, and then perform processing analysis. So we really got to the point that we're really integrating both the imagery and the raster data together to work really seamlessly together. So really, and scale that and make that really shareable.
I love that. Okay, so what I'm learning is that I have some options on how to manage and deploy. And so also in the plenary, I saw all different types of analyses. And so, could I use some of these to do biodiversity monitoring? And so, Vinay, I want to toss that one to you.
Yes, absolutely, Rae. Image analysis is really about extracting meaningful information from imagery so that you can make actionable decisions. So let's start with the work that you do, which conservationists do.
Great.
You need to perform landslide analysis or susceptibility analysis, identify areas that are susceptible to certain types of phenomena. You need to identify or perform suitability analysis, identify locations where certain types of habitats are most suitable to live in.
Exactly.
So for all of this, you need to work with imagery, different types of imagery, landscape layers, elevation layers, optical imagery, and more. There's a lot of imagery that you need to work with. climatologists and ag experts, they're seeking to understand trends and perform predictive modeling. To do this, they need that additional dimension of time. You get that dimension of time through multi-dimensional data sets. So there's so much that you can do with imagery.
Sure.
In the plenary, the demos that you saw this morning, the first two demonstrations, the first one was the United States Forestry Services. You know, they built this forest inventory from a temporal stack of images, from a temporal remote sensing record using machine learning algorithms. Super stoked about what I just saw there. The ArcGIS image presentation was automated feature extraction, which was a basis for everything that I just talked about.
Sure.
To perform workflows like urban planning, flood modeling, landslide susceptibility, and so much more. Now, what I'm really excited about is how that technology really scales, right? I do not have to worry about the infrastructure. You do not have to worry about the infrastructure.
Right.
As an analyst, as a user, and you as a scientist, all you need to focus on is the science and not the infrastructure.
That's fantastic. I love that. And I would love to loop Richard in on this conversation as well. Richard, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think as the guy on the business side of things, you know, we're really seeing private organizations starting to look at ways to implement sustainability programs. And in boardrooms really around the world, we're seeing organizations start to recognize the threat of climate change to their long-term viability. And so they're implementing these sustainability programs, and they recognize that remote sensing data is going to be foundational to developing those programs, implementing them, and then monitoring them to make sure that they're having the intended effect. So it's really getting outside of just the science and research communities and into the boardrooms and management teams of corporations around the world. And it's really exciting to see that.
Fantastic. Oh, I really love that. You all are giving me so much to think about. And it looks like I have a lot of learning to do as well, which is a bit intimidating. But I wanted to actually change the subject a little bit to drones. So one of the projects I was hoping to do was capture a detailed model of the topography of the landscape that I'm working in. And in the past, this would have been time consuming, it would have been expensive, just a real to-do. But in the plenary, there was a presentation on something called site scan. So could I use that to monitor, for example, wildlife corridors on a landscape?
Yep.
So Richard, what do you think?
Absolutely. I think drones are the perfect tool for you because they're really democratizing access to imagery and LiDAR data in a way that you really can't replicate from an aircraft or a satellite collection. You know, and they produce amazingly accurate ortho photos for those of you who are still working with 2D imagery, but also incredibly dense point clouds that you can perform analytics against, and 3D meshes that you can do incredible visualizations and immersive. If you saw the 3D demo this morning with Adrian, those meshes came from SiteScan. They were processed by SiteScan, and they created those immersive environments. But for you, and to your comment earlier about it being static, what drones really can give you are higher resolution data that you need to see what you need to see for your work, but also at a higher refresh rate. More frequent collects to allow you to get a more granular temporal view of the area that you're studying. And together these things create both a near real-time operational awareness kind of situation, but also a temporal data stack for analysis. And really, SiteScan gives you the full end-to-end solution for that, to plan your flights, collect your data, manage your drone fleets, process that data, and then bring it into ArcGIS for your analysis.
Yeah. But Richard, really, we shouldn't really forget about the inspection workflows as well. I mean, really, many organizations are collecting imagery from drones, mobile, terrestrial sensors, including obliques, 360, and street side imagery. And really, they're using this not only to create 3D products like meshes and DTMs, a great example today with Telluride, but they're actually capturing this data as a snapshot in time to really use that to determine the assets today, or to collect the imagery to use later as change detection to see how things have changed. So this is really where the tools such as quick capture and oriented imagery really come into their own to support that different type of modality that most people don't really realize as well.
Yeah, I can tell you want to jump in as well.
Oh yeah, it's really, now based on what he said, it's exciting to see how all the imagery being collected is being used to perform trend analysis, identify trends, and predictive modeling. What really tickles my attention is how our AI has really evolved at Esri over the past couple of years. We started with integration with third-party modules. Then we've got tools, intuitive tools, which is developed in desktop and then in enterprise. And now at the plenary, you saw it, it's available in online as well. And now what we've introduced is pre-trained models. With pre-trained models, you no longer have to worry about infrastructure. You no longer have to worry about compute, and you don't need the expertise to train a deep learning model. You can use that pre-trained model directly with your data, right? And in fact, today what I want to announce is we released 8 new models, deep learning models.
Oh, wow.
Pre-trained models. It's available on the Living Atlas. And
that's a big deal.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, the presentation that you saw this morning, the ArcGIS image presentation, they use these models to extract features. They extracted land cover map, they extracted building footprints, they extracted roads. Essentially, they created their geospatial, their foundational geospatial database ground up using raw imagery, right? So I am super stoked about what lies, moving forward, what's going to be there.
Yeah, well, now I'm, geeking out a bit about that because that makes me really excited. And speaking of the future of NA, I'm curious, and I'm sure so many of the users out there are curious, what does Esri have planned for the future? What's coming up next? Peter, can you tell us?
Well, I mean, we've really broken imagery out of its silo and integrated with all other forms of spatial data. And we really need to focus now on ramping that up, scaling both the imagery capabilities up. And much of the effort is also going into working with imagery partners. So these are providers that enable us to create integrated solutions with imagery and analysis that really enables anybody to access the imagery that they need and perform analytics. So this may be from archived imagery, but also other imagery that's new imagery and archived imagery. So we're really basically making imagery part of what I would refer to as the spatial information nervous system. It's where we're really going to.
A spatial information nervous system. And for those of you who joined us for this conversation, I'd like to thank my guests so much. There is so much that I didn't realize was going on with imagery, so I have to get on it. I know my homework that I have to do.